Welcome to the April 10th bhyve production user call. We have Hans, Andrew, Richard, Pat, Alexander, Eva, Ben, and myself, Michael, so far. And let's see, we have someone who's volunteered to do the honors at the end. There is great news in uh, the bhyve FreeBSD Illumos detente circles insofar as Patrick kindly clarified the dual licensing of all their contributions at Oxide so that Hans can move forward on CPUID work in FreeBSD and improvements, starting with bringing in some of that Illumos code. So thank you, Patrick, profoundly for your help there. If you've been following the calls, a few of us have been looking at OpenPower / Power 910 / PowerPC platform options, and there is the OSU OSL lab here in Oregon, of all places, down in Corvallis. And Eva has hardware. And a bunch of us are looking at elevating that as a platform to perhaps even tier one level on FreeBSD, specifically with, say, either a front end to their built-in virtualization or, in fact, bhyve. Justin Hibbets is interested in that, and it's been a great discussion going on. Just reach out to any of us if interested, or especially if you have hardware that either needs a home or you want to put online for people to use. One small heads up, there is a FreeBSD Foundation Discord. Ask me anything next week at this exact time. Consensus is perhaps we just say, hey, go listen in on that. We'll perhaps back channel join the call here if it's truly off topic. But I think let's just say you're invited to that. Enjoy. And thank you, Eva, for updating the news there. Maybe we'll revisit that before the end. And heads up, please, please, please test Alexei's bhyve-firmware EDK2 port. It has nifty bhyve graphics. It boots so quickly that it was hard to get a screenshot of such graphics. So it is a bug report per ports tradition in FreeBSD rather than a review. And my machine is super slow with the recording, so pardon my agonizing scrolling. Any questions or comments so far? And I want to raise a topic that need not be addressed in much depth, especially for want of yawn, but we've been talking kind of back channel on this as I desperately try to scroll up just a few lines on my slow, overworked machine. So in the course of these calls, we've discussed some of the less obvious requirements for, say, bhyve and, say, process supervision. I belted this out yesterday, and I'm writing this virtualization production environment requirements based on some recent experiences of mine in production with, say, Windows VMs under bhyve that have been running for over a year, Windows Server specifically, and hearing proposals for, say, a new web interface for bhyve, which sounds fantastic. However, I sure hope everyone, including those who have built and abandoned various management tools, not unlike for jails. And yep, you can snicker, Illumos folks who have had very awesome, comprehensive zones and bhyve management for some time and crossbow networking and you name it. But I wanted to raise some points here, and please just either chime in with yours or here and now or later. I don't care, but I do want to get it out there because, hey, in context, I've been supporting TrueNAS for over a decade, and there's this sort of circular blame game of, well, that's a storage problem, not our problem. That's a VMware problem, not our problem. Oh, that's a networking problem, not our problem. Go away. And at the very peak of all that, in this lovely context of FreeBSD and Illumos being hyperconverged platforms, well, you could have, say, ESXi and TrueNAS communicate, say, over VAAI, say, hey, I want to do a snapshot. Okay, here's a snapshot, and it quiesces at the VM, and then snapshots on ZFS, and then it deletes the snapshot and does stuff. That was like the peak of all this. Well, moving on, gee, virtual machines do not fit the Unix host model where your mail server starts up at boot time and shuts down at stop time. That's it. Well, they come and go. You may not want your VMs to all start at once. You may want VMs to come up at, say, in the example here, 3 a.m. for the backup job. You may not want to just put a VM into a boot loop and have it constantly rebooting for days on end and a whole bunch of stuff. Some VMs have, say, fancy databases that must very slowly, cleanly be quiesced before shutdown. And that may take n number of minutes, etc. Stop me if you've got a point on any of these, but I'll just paint the picture and we'll go from there. Gee, that VAAI high peak highlight was like one tiny element. I'm thinking, oh, gee, I need like what, Telnet or something to go see if a database appears to be up by simply seeing that its port is open, nothing more, nothing less. So maybe there's a need for a little signaling and messaging and querying to say, hey, what's my metric of success and can I jump on a system? I think in this, I'll use this wonderful late 90s example of here's the web server, here's the database server over there, possibly over ODBC. And it's like, hello, I need my database before I start the web server. So what does that communication look like between systems? There have been some great presentations on Immunes, a nifty FreeBSD dynamic network prototyping system like GNS 3. There are links there in the doc, which lets you like graphically build a network and then push it to systems. I'm talking to Jan about what S6RC can and can't do because so far it seems to be the most sophisticated process supervision thing out there to date, although it's not superhuman friendly. And of course, the networking, which we've discussed at length on these calls, be it all the stuff that must be in place before you even think about starting up a VM and fancy stuff like SRIOV and storage. Gee, they're all the, of course, this gets the more traditional bhyve, what device model you use for storage, be it VirtIO SCSI or something, et cetera, et cetera. Please, your criteria here. Then, of course, the super classic mechanics of like, gee, how much RAM, what CPU type topology. This is the kind of stuff that completely burned me in the behind recently. And thank you, Hans, for looking at the CPUID work where maybe like Proxmox does quite enthusiastically and even VMware, you can say this is a modern-ish Intel CPU with AVX something support, have a nice day, and it's relatively portable insofar as it's a subset of the actual CPU features. What does guest communication look like? I know that FreeNAS 10 people were trying to do a bhyve guest agent, so at least you can say something administrative things like, hey, sync before we snapshot, or there is various fancy virtual shadow copy, I think, or whatever VSS goodies in Windows when it can snapshot an entire running system and dump it out to a backup. Well, having that communication is a good thing. And then, of course, finally to the point of what brought me here, oh, a web interface. Yes, so you want to make a web interface. Is it secure insofar as we're talking about doing like root level deep storage management and networking in which something going wrong, either by accident or maliciously, could do terrible things? Will it be in any way web accessible like all those people doing their nifty Nextcloud and having, say, a reverse proxy, etc.? Will it be mobile device friendly? Will it be accessibility friendly? And so in researching, I found, gee, here are like blog posts on the zillion billion VMware examples and parameters where they actually did kind of write the book on what your modern virtualization looks like, etc. And Pat, yeah, you're commenting on the sync. That's like that's for the folks who've been at it a long time when you had to even do that on a basic system, etc. So there is the picture I wanted to paint. I would love your real world feedback. Like, am I off kilter here, or is that kind of what it looks like? And we've had this god awful, unfortunate situation where vendors like Veeam and ESXi and TrueNAS or NetApp all kind of just say, oh, nope, not a problem. Have a nice day. And we have like this bare minimum intercommunication. Whew, there, I said it. Anyone, or move on? There, I painted the picture. Think about it, please. And does Illumos have any awesome, amazing low-level intercommunication between two systems such that we do not start this zoned virtual machine until this resource is on another system is up because it's academic until, say, that database it depends on is up? there any notion there, or is this kind of a greenfield notion simply because open source allows this kind of intercommunication rather than vendors just blaming each other? Moving on, then, please do think about those. There have been a bunch of bridge updates, and LW is the nickname. This keeps coming up that, hey, and I think in the last call we addressed the fact that, hey, if you don't set a default VLAN on FreeBSD, well, it may not do what you expect when you do later add one. Jan probably has the most to say on this topic. So I've linked some of that discussion, and these have just been kind of rapid fire discussions on the Fediverse. So I'll bring up one most recent example. Today's comment was, hey, most of it's complete, but he's found a few issues and reviews are happening. So hallelujah. Related to that, as I put at the bottom, is based on many calls here, what would a caching tap device look like in FreeBSD so we can be a little closer to the cool kids on Illumos? Yeah, we know, we're catching up. But thank you for ZFS and dtrace, and our gift to you is
Well, wouldn't it
bhyve.
be varnish? Like that's kind of the simple one, yeah.
On
Just to use varnish on the FreeBSD
For which aspect? The networking or back to
for
the web
caching.
interface? For caching. Uh,
Yep.
for a bridge device, it's more of a
Oh,
packet
for
batching.
bridge. I
Yeah,
thought.
the batching
Yeah.
is the
Never mind.
nightmare.
Never
It's very
mind.
sequential, and we're like, oh, hi, packet. Oh,
Mhm.
shake hands with the packet and move on to the next one and move on to the next one. Anywho,
Yep.
So
Yep.
oh, Jan, welcome. There you are. So maybe
yeah,
you have some thoughts on this last topic or all these bridge
just
updates.
joined.
Yes, welcome. I'll put you at the top there. Actually, I
Are
probably
we
should have.
recording?
Oh, yes, we are.
Okay.
Um, that all said, Jan, do you have a short description of these recent bridge changes for the wonderful audience here from LW or LLFW is his nickname, her nickname, their nickname?
Give me a second to read the
Sure.
commit message.
Okay, and that's like one of several to make it more complex, and it's
I
not
can't read it if
necessarily.
it's off screen.
Oh,
I have,
sorry.
have the link.
Oh, you're on a phone on a tram. A nice, efficient public transportation means that we don't have
Neither.
necessarily out west.
A second home.
Okay. Ah, let's see. I'm taking care of a small administrative task about getting your name on the
Yeah.
agenda. So
this is about not having to walk a list, which is normally a handful of interfaces or a dozen or so. And it's nice. It sounds useful, but it's not a game changer.
and again, it's one of several things they're working on. So it's
So,
been a little hard to track insofar as it's like pull requests rather than,
yeah.
oh my God, rather than
Bridge
just
driver is a
traditional
bit
reviews.
special compared to other pseudo drivers because it's also part of the ether and potentially and so on. So some cases the kernel directly dispatches to the bridge driver if loaded.
Oh, okay.
So there are a handful of little optimizations where the bridge driver has gotten its tentacles into the rest of the network stack to help a bit. Yeah.
Okay.
It will probably help a little, especially with bridge if you have lots of bridges with lots of interfaces. Um,
And I don't know if you caught me mentioning last week's touching on the
VLANs.
default VLAN behavior. Yeah, like if
Yeah,
you later in life think, oh, I should add a bunch of VLANs, it was like, oh, not doing what
this
you
is so that
expected.
you can change the native VLAN ID, primary VLAN ID, whatever you want to call it, of a bridge member interface because there are really nasty interactions when you combine VLAN interfaces with the bridge driver. I've seen this break hardware switching implementations of HP completely, so that
Oh,
you bring
interesting.
down your whole network. Um, because what happens then is you're starting to speak spanning tree intact VLAN frames, which will confuse the heck out of some switches,
Hmm.
like
Okay.
Aruba and HP stuff. Uh, and we will just unidirectionally stop forwarding or some crazy shit like that,
Hmm.
and effectively break your network because there is no standardized semantic for it, but what they are implementing is stupid. But what FreeBSD does is self-consistent, but not standardized anywhere because you're not supposed to tag yeah, your BPDUs.
Okay. I'm dropping the Fediverse link of one of these comments in there, and you can follow along with LW. I do not know what LW is short for. Uh, Loves Windows. I
Oh,
do know
don't
Linux
be mean.
worker. I don't know. I'm old and I really don't like nicknames because I'm not good at keeping track of all the mappings. That's why. So
So, yeah,
let's see.
having this interface primary VLAN ID is nice if you need it. If not, it's doesn't hurt.
Got it. And this was one of the
Just don't
earliest
configure it
versions.
if you don't want it. It can't add much overhead. Hmm.
Cool.
Oh, wait. An interface port can be set to access trunk hybrid. Okay, default is hybrid. Uh-huh. That sounds a lot more interesting.
Okay.
So this is makes it feel a lot more like a real switch. Okay, an access has probably only one carries only one VLAN and then untagged. Trunk probably only carries tagged frames, and hybrid has a default primary VLAN ID, which is the one carried untagged.
I'm
Yeah.
really having gone through those, going through the main sort of feed of theirs.
So
It's
if you go
low
back
traffic.
now,
Uh,
so
that
that we
that
can
text is
finish
in
the
the
list.
doc. I
Oh,
thought you covered it. Now
yep.
let's take a
No,
look at the
I
doc.
haven't looked over all of it,
Anyway, so
but
there
it's
that was the
slowly
early one.
loading.
There's more to it. So
Mhm.
anyway, follow that person on social media and whatever reviews. I'm just glad they're giving some love to that.
Yeah, the thing this doesn't impact is just that the normal FreeBSD or Unix way of processing each packet to completion in the network stack.
Hmm.
That's just how your traditional Unix network stack works. Doesn't
Right.
matter if it's Linux, BSD, anything else, which of course means you have all of the overhead per packet.
Okay. And Jan, I believe you were advocating for a multi-queue tap interface. Was it specifically tap that would need it, not the bridge?
Um, well, a multi-queue way to attach userland and bhyve to Ethernet and preferably also IP, so TON as well. The obvious way to plug it in would be to put it into tap and by extension TON. That so Linux supports this mode of operation, kind of at least the multi-queue, where they allow you to kind of reopen a tab device multiple times.
I see.
That gives you effectively a new queue. It's a bit hacky how they express that via the system call interface, but the semantics, which I've seen underdocumented, let's say, makes
Yeah,
sense if I understand it correctly, which is you can still only open the tab once, but if you have it, you can dupe it, and the dup of the open slash dev FD has the semantic of effectively not giving you the same file descriptor, but a new queue on the tab interface, um, which is a way you can have multi-queue operation. And then they're using, if enabled, I think the send MMSG and receive MMSG, so send and receive multiple, system calls for batching, which, yeah, would only have to be implemented in FreeBSD because we have the libc function, but not the system call. So FreeBSD kind of pretends that it has this send and receive multiple, but in reality, it's just a little wrapper with poll. So if you already have a KQ enabled event loop, it can be slower to use this libc wrapper than just doing it with your main event loop. Mm, and once we've done this, or someone has done it for us, haha, the next problem is that bhyve does not really do any kind of batch processing of packets either. So I looked at the backend defining structure where you have all the function signatures for the callbacks and thought, oh wait, this looks like it takes an array of IO vectors. That means there's some kind of API to express the batching. But no, apparently you can use gather for each frame of the virtual network, but not multiple frames per function call. So yeah, it's not much of a change, but you would have to have at least an additional optional function for batch processing or change it the default one to either take, I don't know, an array of arrays or something else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Someone kindly wrote me directly and I completely forgot. And they have beautiful images to go with this text,
Mhm.
which is like router to bridge to whatever. So I will clean this up
I
for
guess you could
consumption. Go ahead.
kind of hack around it by putting a little buffer in front of it of like 50 packets or so, trying to drain one side and then forward to the other. And yeah, but that would require you to basically go over each packet in a buffer and then hope that you can then react, kind of rebatch them, which no wouldn't be nice either.
Okay. Uh, I will try to insert the little diagrams and get back to that. And hopefully we'll have someone who can buy some time.
Now that we have
Yes.
the VPP port,
What's the state of that? I forgot about that
good
entirely.
question. I haven't had the
Okay.
time to tinker with it.
Okay. Can you
Maybe
tell
we
our
should
audience
get
briefly what
the
VPP refers to?
vector
Virtual.
packet processing. Yeah,
Okay, I'll put that question
it
here.
stands
Q
for
VPP.
it's a user space forwarding engine. Inspired by the way Cisco does packet processing and less network stacks,
Mhm.
where instead of processing each packet to completion, you're kind of splitting up the packet processing in stages and processing one stage across a batch of packets, and then you have sub batches if they're going different directions
Mhm.
or different next layers, like once goes to the local IP processing, the other to the bridge or something like that. And then these batches go to the next layer up. The advantage of that is that the idea is that the stages are small enough that they fit into your instruction caches without misses. And the data structure will also have much better locality because you're only looking at one stage's next step data structure, whether that is a bridges forwarding information base or IP next hop database or whatever, you're saving a lot of cache misses. And yeah, it can give you like between a factor of 10 and 100 throughput improvement in packets per second. If you have small packets, that's almost translates to throughput. If you have giant jumbo frames, it doesn't matter that much.
Hmm.
But few of us send 9,000 or larger by jumbo frames around all day.
Okay.
So yeah,
Okay, I selfishly took advantage of your description by dropping in the graphics that someone kindly shared, so I can
But
scroll
I
back
brought
up.
up VPP because
Yes,
they
sir.
already have a way to hook virtual machines into it for QEMU, where they set up shared memory buffers over Unix sockets, which looks a lot like a kind of user space netmap. And bringing that to um, into bhyve would mean that yeah, we get a well optimized data plane.
Hmm. Any chance you have a
And
link for that?
I have looked it up somewhere in the minutes.
Okay. And then I'll leave it at that. So if I can
Let me
ever so
check
gently
if I can
scroll
quickly
here.
find that.
Cool.
VM used to,
Okay. I found this, and we can punch through it as if I can get the font under control. So, as an old FreeBSD user, they've been following along from their
so this
Cisco
is, I think,
training.
the link you've been asking for.
Cool, thank you.
The-
And they are giving a description here. Picture Switch does the same thing, and they did lovely graphics that I trust are shareable. Ooh, with bhyve included. Bless their hearts. Uh, with colored tagging. Great. And thank you for that link. I'm heading down the dock and have a place for it. Uh, I hope you, the active audience and passive audience, find this valuable, describing 802.1q bridges. And
Yeah, the problem is that you can't really filter VLAN membership per port, as far as I know. Maybe that's something which LW is working on.
okay, well, at
So
best we can
what
paint
you
this
can do is you
picture.
have the bridge driver in FreeBSD. It has a forwarding information.
Hmm.
It tracks the MAC address per VLAN. So it is a VLAN aware bridge, but you can there's no good way to express that certain member ports are allowed to be on certain VLAN IDs. So you cannot say like my member interface tab 22 is only to use allowed to use VLAN 22 and VLAN 1 or something. You can do it by filtering on the member ports with IPFW. And maybe if you put it at the very beginning of your rule set with the right table type in IPFW, you can make it kind of perform reasonably. But you shouldn't have to use a firewall for VLAN access on a bridge because yeah, you would have to dispatch on the bridge and the member interface. Yeah, at least two table
Okay,
lookups.
cool. Uh, I will leave this link to the audience, to the reader. It's in chat. It's now in the doc in a few seconds, and we shall move on. Thank you, Jan. Super quick push from a previous meeting where things got really long and on different topics. I took another look at FreeBSD Zen. I tried the syntax from the handbook. It more or less worked. I had trouble on an AMD CPU. I synchronized my script xenomorph with what the handbook says, for better, for worse. It just simply goes through the steps for you and sets up a Zen host. And I did not see Zen packages on ARM64. I see something that dropped in there. What you got in chat? Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. Of course, thank you, Zoom. It chops off who actually wrote that. So moving on. I have a whole bunch of comments on using vm-bhyve in production. Like, it runs the bookkeeping system that's really important to the business. So I have a vested interest in it doing things predictably. And adding a device for database dumps. Well, thank you, Jan, for VPP news. In chat, wow, you add a device for database dumps and then suddenly it renumbers the PCI bus devices and then networking breaks, and I found a PR referencing that, and it somehow screamed home lab to me. And of course, it doesn't support the new bhyve configuration syntax, having predated that like so many tools. So this has also influenced that list of virtualization environment points I have above. So enjoy if you are curious. I did like what they said about the, not that I've tried it, but the like in-depth NVMe configuration with QDepth and other stuff. That's kind of cool. They also had some great advice on Windows 7 UEFI VMs, which came up last week with like how to support, abandonware mission critical systems. I think I called it mission critical abandonware. And I'm just collecting data on how to, say, fingerprint a system for efficient use of tools like bhyve, vm-bhyve, or others. I'm curious if you can, say, pass a Windows key through ACPI to a virtual machine. You can on QEMU. That might be a nice feature to have, looking at Hans, and I was a little
So if
shocked
you
that it's not quite an RC script and it doesn't behave like one, so a user might be surprised there. Yes, Jan.
if you go up a little bit
Yep.
at the relevant QUID, like half a page or so, maybe a little bit more. Another half a page, yep. So the ACPI stuff.
Yes.
Let me have a look, then I can match that against the man dot.
Oh, yeah. I do have the syntax to at least retrieve that on, say, FreeBSD with ACPI CA tools.
Yeah.
But if the OS can simply magically find it, that'd be kind of cool.
You want to pass your host's information into a bhyve guest
No,
so that
punch
you can
a
use the
Windows
keep
license
using the
key
OEM.
that shows up in ACPI like an Ivy Bridge or newer Windows
Mm-hmm.
laptop
For
and
yeah,
tell
okay.
it.
So you want to kind of cheat and pass through the OEM license.
Bingo. There we
Yeah,
go. Uh,
guess match it against
slick is their term for it.
man.cbs-bhyve config. So yeah,
Hmm.
I don't know how flexible it is. There has been some work, I think a year ago or so, on making the bhyve ACPI tables less static, and that
Oh,
was one of the things which caused regressions in
oh,
14, which were
okay.
then fixed.
Okay.
Uh,
Oh, it's cut off.
so
So this topic is a journey, I will be first to admit. Yeah. Oop, I misspelled whatever. Maybe it's appropriate. Anyway, I will just keep dumping my wisdom in there. And I even looked at vaguely BSD licensed web contraptions like ISP config, because hey, Webmin kind of wrote the book long ago and people snicker at it. And I have no idea where Perl stands in 2025, although I do know people who have full-time Perl jobs. So it's a journey. Pat, you had some questions that may have been gently addressed, but let's make sure you are set. I'm looking at the chat to copy those out.
I'm mostly good with the caveat that what I heard you
Ooh,
say
and
was
Ben has
that
a
you should
question.
set the cache in the guest, but the handbook says to do it in the host. So I
which cache?
ZFS ARC.
um so I have a host and a guest both running ZFS, and the handbook says to set primary cache metadata in the host. And I had asked about it, and Michael said to do it in the guest, and so just pointing out that it's written
And
down.
Michael is confused.
He could easily be. I mean, look, he's trying to just get this doc to respond. Go ahead, Jan. Set me straight, per tradition.
So if you leave it by default, the problem is that both the host and the guest ZFS will do their very best to use all memory available to them.
He's
Correct.
not
As
saying to leave it default.
no, if you do follow the handbook guide and set it to primary cache, the host will cache the metadata required to quickly locate the blocks on disk, but will not cache the blocks themselves, making up the guest block device. And that's what I found to be the best way to configure the host ZFS, create a ZVOL, sorry, for the passing through to the guest, and then set its caching property to primary cache equals metadata only. That the kind of downside is that because the level 2 arc is a pure victim cache, you will never make use of level 2 arc. So yeah, you're losing the opportunity to cache, but I found it to be a good trade-off. In theory, I guess you could configure the guest to use cache-only metadata, but then you're taking a whole lot more guest to host to guest transitions to get to the block content because you're now only caching it in the host. So you would still have to do a read on the virtual storage device in the guest kernel as if you had a full cache miss. You will just then have a good cache on your virtual block device, but you're still taking all the overhead of reading from a virtual device, even if you're hitting the host cache.
So to recap, the handbook says primary cache equals what? And Jan, you're saying what?
Metadata.
Okay, so let me get the host here. So host, handbook says host metadata and guest says which?
Do you have a link, Pat? Oh.
Yeah, 1 second. That explanation made sense. Thank you very much. That was really good.
So Jan, are you agreeing with the handbook that the host is metadata?
If the handbook states what Pat reported, yes.
Okay.
That's what
And
I
then
heard.
Jan, the guest on
I
your
don't
machine?
remember that in the handbook, so it has to be a fairly recent change that I didn't have reason to look up.
Okay, so then Jan, on your very system, the guest has what primary cache setting for ZFS?
The guest doesn't. I don't change anything inside the guest. I only change the primary cache property to metadata on the host.
Okay, fine.
And because I don't keep anything I expect to read frequently, there I commonly set it on a parent and have it inherit to all bhyve devs. So I just have an ancestor data set which contains an empty mount point, or it knows the little config file or something per guest, which is only run on guest startup or stuff like that. So nothing where performance matters. And then I set the primary cache equals metadata on each, only on the parent, so I don't have to set it per data set because it inherits.
And my rationale was that the host is the true storage provider. Nonetheless, it always terminates there. And so, yes, I guess
Yeah,
the
but
acrobatics of that. But anyway, having your VMs all
so
blossom and maximize their memory, which is generally not wired, was my thinking. I'm happy to be wrong. Oh, here we go. Last paragraph.
yeah,
Thank you.
if you aggressively overcommit your memory and all your virtual machines have memory ballooning support, there may be a good argument for your configuration so that you can more heavily overcommit this way. But you're not going to make anyone happy except some bean counter.
Exactly. And this is also inspired by the fact that people have burnt the candle for VM memory and ARC and collided over and
On
over
both
from almost
ends.
day one on bhyve. So it's like on ZFS. So there's that.
Yeah,
Anywho, thank you, Pat, for the handbook entry. I am putting it in the doc. Appreciated.
wait.
And while I do that, you can move on to your next question. Oh, the creating base.txt, etc. So I have my very strong opinions on that, but I'll let others comment.
Yeah, there are lots of ways to provision your guests. I know that you hate installers.
Yeah, that's like what decade is this? They were great long ago. And I will
Um,
fault my younger self for not saying, yo, FreeBSD needs package base back in like what 5.0 with any new package updates just to compete with the rest of the world.
sorry,
But no, here we are finally getting it sometime for my
do you
grandchildren.
remember the old package underscore tools?
Absolutely. Not saying they were perfect, but darn it, the OS don't care. I mean, Etsy directory is an Etsy directory, and like base.txz back then,
Hmm.
different compression. Yeah, okay, tar, like Jeezy,
No, that
woohoo.
wasn't it. The problem
Right?
were things like, oh, official packages are built once per release and never updated.
Oh, well, that too. Yeah. Anyway, they were dark
Yeah.
ages, but still, the base OS could have been had these two simple things and a few extras packaged up. Thank you very much, like everyone else did. Anyway, did you find that link I suggested, Pat, or not? I will drop
So
it
Yeah, I
to
haven't
you.
looked closely at it, but I
Okay, well,
bookmarked him.
yeah, you can easily install without BSD install. Heck, you can even use BSD install in fully automated install mode so that you never have to interact with it,
yep,
but
exportable
still get
generic.
the opportunity to create a new file system with a new UUID instead of having to kind of patch the UUID around and so on in your file systems. You can create the file system optimized for the amount of storage you have. You don't have to grow it beyond rhyme or reason. Like, oh, we have a 32 gig UFS image compressed, and but I want to install it on a tiny VM with 5 gigs of storage. Can't do that.
Yeah, sorry, and just to clarify, I'm the FreeBSD setup is great. It's totally scripted end to end. I want to do the same thing with the Linux distro, is what I was getting at. And so I guess what I'm kind of taking away from this is that there needs to be a like I need to boot a lin so with FreeBSD, I can just configure the file system, I can make FS, and then I have an image. But for Linux, I'm gonna need to boot some Linux instance. Um, and then there, like maybe I could prepare a file system locally, and attach it as a disk, but like at some point I'm gonna need to just boot a Linux VM and then do something because I need that exe file system. But like if I just have a free what I'm trying to get is I'm on a FreeBSD development machine and I want to run a script that provisions a brand new Linux distro from scratch the same way that I do with my FreeBSD images. And maybe there's something in Imagine. But if Michael, if I'm understanding correctly, this is relying on like a pre-built image from some upstream vendor,
That is
right?
correct. Debian publishes them, OmniOS publishes them, FreeBSD publishes them, MikroTik publishes them, and various folks have them. So I just said, "Oh, you've got one? I'll try it."
Wait,
Um,
um,
and
Michael,
heck, I'm
I just
tempted to.
realized
Yep.
there's an easy way to take a bigger UFS install image and provision it on a smaller disk.
Oh, yes,
You dump and
please.
restore,
Ha, yes,
dump
great.
pipe restore to the smaller file system. So if you have your 5 GB virtual machine, yeah, you can do it in a streaming fashion. It's not going to be particularly fast, but it's a one-time installation step, right?
True. And as I recall, there was a Fuse FS contraption to use XFS and goodies on FreeBSD if you really want to, really, really, really want to hand roll your own
What?
thing with a combination of, say, FAI, the fully automated installer, and Deb Bootstrap, and knock yourself out. But I thought, oh, I can have a VM image in a few seconds, and maybe I'll even set up a demo in the background here and just show that here's Debian in a few seconds. I don't know what else you want from like your purposes, but anyway.
Uh,
I
I
will
mean,
search on the doc. I think it's in there for the XFS goodies. Yes, Jan.
do you remember the slightly cursed old Nano BSD
Yes, of
with
course.
dual image plus configuration?
Dude, the FreeNAS used that for years, and the Olivier router contraption, what was it? Anyway, yeah, it's a thing. XFS. Let's see if that's in there. Ben, you had questions.
If I remember correctly, the XFS driver for FreeBSD, which existed slash exists, is read only and was
Oh,
written to migrate off Linux.
maybe, but I thought there was a fuse contraption, but I could be wrong. I'm doing a search here.
Oh, there is the run basically a whole Linux kernel as a fuse server.
Oof.
That includes full XFS read-write support.
For those who
Because you're
celebrate.
basically taking a significant part of the Linux kernel, running it as a fuse server in user space, and then you can, I think, even use bhyve-FS if you really want to for some weird reason.
Ben, you want better, gooder, efficient inter-VM communication. Is that accurate? You have 2 to 3 VMs, A and B, blah, blah, blah. Open sense. Let her rip.
Are you able to hear me?
Yep. Welcome.
Yeah, I had thank you so much. I had in a one previous job where they gave us an ESXi server and we could build a network inside that server to help test our application. And like I put a FreeBSD server in there and then ran jails inside of that so I can have a web server and different things. But I needed to have two networks out. One was the real network to get to the systems, and the other was like a maintenance network. And I ran, like a firewall. I guess it was pfSense at the time, or the one that started monowall, something I ran in there. But I just wanted to know, I want to build something like that now for my current work, and I'm wondering if I can do it with bhyve instead of having to. The only one I've ever seen that could do it was ESXi, but I've been hearing lots of good things about bhyve, and I was hoping it could do that.
So it can do it up to a certain data rate.
I
Unless you.
Andrew, you're generally pretty concise. What you got? What's your take, and then Jan?
well, I run this exact setup on a Lumos. I have an OpenSense firewall. I have multiple server VM instances behind it, and they are I'm able to do that using what they call an ether stub in the Lumos world, which is basically a virtual switch.
Isn't an ether stub a port on the switch?
No, it is a virtual switch. It is pure software. It doesn't exist. We
Yeah, I think
define
that's
it.
what.
It's the same thing as what ESXi does basically for their virtual switches.
Yeah.
We just define a named ether stub, and we take when we do either bhyve or zones or whatever, we tend to make a VNIC that we assign to that VM, and so we assign the VNIC to the ether stub, and that's how we do it on our side. So it's a little bit different than how they do it on the BSD side.
But Ben, you can do it on FreeBSD. What data and packet rates are you aiming for? How fast do you need it to be?
I don't need it to be super fast. I just need it to allow the connections.
Oh, so in that case, you can use any reasonable solution because FreeBSD, of course, again, has multiple ways of doing things. The most straightforward one I see is to create a bridge or two, and then put your bhyve guests on there with top or VMnet interfaces, and basically run one virtual machine as the gateway for the other ones. So you would have, if you want the host to be on its physical interface too, so that it's easier to manage, you would end up with a configuration which looks like that. Let's say IX0 is your physical 10 gig Ethernet interface. You have that, you add it as first member interface to bridge 0. Then you create a tab interface, tab 0, and add it to the same bridge. So now the bridge has two member interfaces. The host IP address configuration now goes on that bridge interface, not on the members. The members are only configured to be up. Now your OpenSense, whatever, or just pure FreeBSD or OpenBSD, whatever you like, a virtualized router on a stick sits there, and it has two virtual network interfaces, one to the bridge to the physical world, and one to the bridge where all the other virtual machines connect. And so on the host, you then have the second bridge, bridge 1. Of course, you can give them meaningful names as well. And that bridge has as its first member interface the secondary NIC of the gateway virtual machine, and presumably no IP address configured because the host is not supposed to be present on both sides. Once you trust that network setup to always come up, and if in theory you could move the host in behind its virtual machine and have the host share the encapsulated network behind your slightly more trusted gateway virtual machine. And you can get better throughput if you can make use of PCIe pass-through and remove some of the software bridges. An unusual configuration, which I sometimes prefer, but which is unfamiliar to lots of, let's say, desktop virtualization users with no networking background, is to rip out all the bridges and configure pure routing. So ultimate microsegmentation, you just have a /31 or /127 or /164 if you don't care for each link, and use routing.
Do you have an example of that in some form, or a blog post, or otherwise?
Yeah, in that case, the downside is that you have to have lots of interfaces. And there is no good driver to use to hook those together unless you go the netgraph route. So with netgraph, you could have two netgraph sockets directly connected and avoid the overhead of having a two-port bridge. Or the other way, which is also very flexible, is to not use bhyve guest for the gateway at all, and instead use the VNet-enabled jail.
Oh, interesting. Oh,
so
I
you
like
can
that.
have multiple instances of the network stack inside the FreeBSD kernel, and the levels are you have multiple routing tables, so multiple forwarding information bases. You just set a loader tunable, or maybe it's even a runtime tunable these days. For the number of routing table you have, there's a fairly low limit, like 16 you can have, because it has to fit in a 4-bit spare field in a struct. But anyway, that's normally enough. That just gives you the opportunity to do things like policy-based routing by overwriting the routing table before the routing decision is made. Then the next level up, so in Cisco parlance, that would be VRF Lite. And then the real thing is full virtual routing functionality, where you have a new instance of the network stack inside a jail with its own firewall configuration, its own interfaces and routing tables. And then you either have to give it one of your real network interfaces or create some kind of pseudo interface. There's a special one called ePair, which is a connection between two network stacks, so that you can have a think of it as a crossover cable between your two network stacks. And yeah, the advantage here is that you're avoiding the overhead of going through a virtual machine because you're staying within the same kernel.
Nice.
And if you want to run jailed workloads, there is not really a need to put any hypervisor on the system, because you can have additional VNet-enabled jails then hidden behind the same host, so that you have one jail act as firewall for other jails within the same system without ever going through a hypervisor. But this is a
Thank
bhyve
you.
call, so maybe you want to have some kind of hypervisor for running Linux workloads, maybe, or a Windows workload, which you really can't do with because I'm not seriously considering something like Wine or Proton.
Cool. Thank
Does
you.
that help?
I can actually probably show my setup if you want.
Go for it. While you do
Sure,
that,
would
Pat,
like
if
to
you're
see
still paying
how it's done
attention,
on a Lumos.
I'm setting up a
You'll
section.
have to
Are
give
you
me
feeling lucky, punk? And you can, I think, just
just a
hijack the
moment.
share. Okay, cool. And I found that half the Linux kernel contraption for Btrfs in FreeBSD, so that you could use a combination of, what do they call it? Deb Bootstrap, Fuse FSLKL, and report back to us how you have completely taken Linux under control under FreeBSD.
Um,
And
All
I
right,
sounds
don't
good.
have Zoom installed on that machine. Give me a second.
No worries.
some um, some of the Linux file systems like FrostFS and the like also have tools similar to MakeFS, where you can create a new file system from a directory.
Can you think of a name off the top of your head?
I know that the SquashFS, because it's a read-only file system, has this
Has to.
functionality.
Okay.
Some of the other embedded focused file systems have similar tools, but I don't know the per file system command name to do it. Yeah. And the nice thing about this is that you don't have to run some kind of Fuse server if you only create a directory and then convert it basically into a file system.
You mind if I steal the screen?
Go for it.
Not at all.
This call is your call. This call is my call.
Share. There's the button.
DMCA
Let's see.
DCMA strike.
Eventually, I'll figure it out. Is that
That's,
showing up?
yes, but unreadable unless you have a 4K screen. And
they
the
tab
recording
it
is just full
to-
HD.
Okay. Let's see.
Can you
Or maybe
just
it's
punch Control Plus a few times?
no. Give me a second. Let me see if I can improve it a bit.
Oh, it's putty. So
Yeah, it's
yeah, in
putty,
putty,
so
you have to go into the settings and change the font size and create a new window.
yeah.
I think. Or change
Shelling
settings,
like
maybe.
it's 1996. I love that
Here.
mess. It's just cool. Pat, I'm giving you some links here for your adventure. Took a minute to find them.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was messing with Dev Bootstrap the other day, but it was
How about
the
that? Is that more reasonable?
file system thing.
I limited it to just the one window.
That's not terrible. Related.
So what I've got here is a number of different things here. I've got my firewall. This just runs RSC Pal World server, and then I'm doing some build related stuff on here. And what I've got is
Can
I've
you
got
hit enter a few times?
better.
Thanks.
Let me
Sure.
guess, you have a Zoom menu floating over it?
And then up here is all the different link devices. I've got it shows the actual physical NICs. I've got 4 on this machine, a 10 gig and a 1 gig. And then for the firewall VM, I've got 3 virtual NICs, one going to the 1 gig, one going to the 10 gig, and then one going to this DMZ0, which is an Ether sub. So it's a virtual network. So firewall 2 is on that. One of the things on RESI is on that. Got a web server instance on that. And then I've got some other stuff that are also on that. And so those have to go through the firewall to get access to the open network. I've also got some that don't even connect to the firewall for I'm setting up a web stack across multiple VMs. And so that's why there are multiple Ether stubs here. So you can do complex things with networking, I guess is what I'm getting at. And then if I were to do, let's see.
And that mix of MTUs hasn't bitten you in the posterior?
No.
Cool.
I mean, all the physical networks are set at 1500. The Ether stuff is all 9000, which is fine. And so
Sweet.
the only thing going out the physical network is this firewall. And if you look, the firewall stuff is all remains 1500, except for the one going to the internal network. Management of these, like this is the format we do it in. You know, it defines all the networks. It automatically assigns them. It creates these devices as needed when I bring up networks or when I bring up VMs. So I guess that's all I've got. This is the firewall's a bhyve instance. For instance, the RSC is not. That's just a normal sparse zone. So it's more like it's a container. That's what I got.
Cool.
Awesome.
And using zones or jails, let's just say containers in general for like heavy lifting networking, which may not have the penalties of virtualized interfaces, is quite compelling and I do not think fully explored. Keep exploring.
Yeah, I wanted the convenience of the nice web interface for OpenSense so that I am running in it, but all of the other instances for instance, like my web server and stuff, that runs in zones because I can run that natively on Solaris.
Very
So,
cool.
or Illumos, whatever.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I've been using it since back when it was Solaris. So bad habits.
Great habits. So, uh, Alexander, y'all been quiet. Do you have any nifty doc news, et cetera, et cetera? 18.
Well, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes,
Yep.
sir.
So last week, or possibly the week before, I'm kind of bad at weeks,
Yeah.
DVL helped me with chunking out my commits for trying to fix the top documentation.
Ooh,
So the
yes.
current top that is in current now has a alphabetized options for the key bindings, and the synopsis has been synced across the flags in the description and the usage, the program usage, and we fixed a couple of documented and undocumented bugs doing that. Currently waiting for review is I'm trying to add the history section to the manual. It first appeared in FreeBSD 2.2.2, as far as I can tell. And I really love history sections, especially when they don't have extra stuff in them. So there's been that.
You have a link to that
You
review
guys might like this.
or reviews, plural?
Yeah, let me
Thank
pull
you.
it up.
Not to derail you from something cool you have to share.
No problem. So by popular demand, we have convinced Colin to generate the hardware release notes out of stable so that we can see what they're going on in stable.
Hmm.
So that's really good. I think that that means that, that really shortens the feedback loop or whatever in between, when we make stuff and then, um, we don't know. Like I can't from my computer generate the hardware release notes. So
Oh, interesting.
they're generated out of the manual, and I've been doing a lot of work over the last year to clean them up and remove all the drivers that don't exist anymore. You would not believe how many drivers I've removed from there that were removed in 2007 or something.
Oh,
That's
yes,
been
yes.
going
I see where you're
super
headed with
well.
that. Yeah, no kidding.
And
Yeah.
other work related to that, um, we got in MDoc 7 the hardware section listed. That's where um, the hardware release notes are generated, and then we got a style section in style.mdoc explaining how to write that so that it renders in the nicest way and looks consistent. So a lot of great progress on hardware release notes lately. Some good progress on top.
Take care, Ben.
Um,
Cool.
and then I also just posted this for review. Some clarifications for networking 7. I wrote networking 7 in late 2023. A quick start guide for connecting, just like basic connecting to a network. It could use more, but also I'm sensitive to it's just a quick start guide. And if we put advanced networking in it, it's going to destroy the point of the page. Because people who need quick start guides don't want to see advanced stuff in their quick start guide. It makes them scared.
Does it touch on jails or VMs in any way, shape, or form, or is that totally appropriate for other
No,
places?
that's totally an advanced use case. I think um, I do. I mean, we could put those later. I mean, if we think about it, jails and FreeBSD, and FreeBSD is an advanced use case. Jails and VMs are a normal part of what people want out of FreeBSD. Um, so as far as how to heuristically flag commits for review if they should be mentioned in release notes, I got sick and tired of asking people to, although I didn't try putting it in maintainers because I didn't want to fight. I've gotten tired of trying to get people to tag man pages. Like we know that if you're changing jails, you have to tag the jails reviewer or you're being a bad boy. And so it's supposed to be like that in man pages. In the developer guide, it says, in the committer's guide, it says to tag man pages if you're changing man pages, but nobody does that. And so I just wrote a Herald rule that notifies me about every man page. So basically, I don't have any way to heuristically tag it, but I see in order to generate a man page for a driver, I need a manual, or in order to generate release notes, I need a manual. And if a manual comes in, it goes right to my email. And also, I do read the commit log every single day. So, and I've been doing that since a long time now, I think, for me. You know, you guys have maybe gray beards and a long time means something different, but I've been doing that since 13. So I have a good map in my head about what's up, and we're not really missing much. And I'd love to improve this workflow, but it's basically like I'm on my own out here, and
Mhm.
you know, it's kind of like everybody doesn't think it's important or wants to fight about it or just silently cheers for me in the background. And that's as good as I've got, which is good enough, honestly. But it's, you know, I don't know how to do these kind of things.
To me, it sounds
Well,
like you have a good working, even if very tedious workflow. For once there's a change to a man page. But what I worried about is sometimes we have things like, oh, the EM or ICB driver gained support for a new Intel card or whatever, and nobody bothered to even touch a man page to tell the rest of the world.
What would help in this case is if people would support me, like
Hmm.
honestly, because I see when that
politically,
happens,
you
I see
mean?
it.
They
Yes,
say
when that
support you.
happens, I see it.
Hmm.
And I tell them when somebody sends a patch extending hardware support, I ask them to put it in the man page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, when
And
people change anything and they have, you know, like it's like not every day, but like every week, I'm asking somebody like, hey, can you update the documentation in this commit as per the rules? And I never say as per the rules because I don't want to damage the relationship. And they're always like, I'm talking to them and like, I'm a 29-year-old kid from Ohio in their eyes. And it's not gonna, you know what I mean? It's not gonna get anywhere. Or sometimes it does. Big shout out to Eric Joyner, who left Intel and still updated the manual for the ICE driver. I asked Christoph, the team lead at Intel, and he said he was going to try to make time to do it on the weekend or something, but they're swamped with work. But he like recognized the importance of it and you know agreed that it needed to be in there. And so then Eric was like, I could probably be convinced to do it if I was sufficiently motivated it, and I sent him some DMs on Discord, and I was like, Eric, only you can do this. Like this right now is like saving FreeBSD. Like the Intel Ice is the cheapest 100 gigabit networking card that there is. I bought one for $90 on eBay. Like this is the meat and potatoes of what people need out of a server operating system. The discoverable hardware and how to use it is high performance networking. And like you've been here so long, like you all the stuff is fresh in your mind, like you know, it'll just be literally just saving FreeBSD, just like holding the wolves away for one more generation of Wi-Fi hardware. And I sent him a bunch of emojis, and then he did it. He literally just did it. It's incredible. So huge shout out to Eric Joyner. The level of, dude, I mean, that's, come on, that's
And
passion.
you said
Like
Intel 100
imagine
gig?
into 100 gig.
Yeah, don't bury the lead. What's a model number to look for on popular platforms?
It's an E810, and there's also an 820 and an 830 that's going in current now.
Cool. Okay.
Um, and you know, I just, if I had any soul or heart left, I would cry, over how beautiful it is. Eric Joyner leaves Intel and still writes the manual for the FreeBSD community so that there can be a continuity in our system, fresh developers, fresh people need this. You know what I mean? It's really just like, um, you know, the billionaires didn't do it, the foundations didn't do it, the companies didn't do it. Eric Joyner did it because he cares.
Wow.
Like,
Yeah. Okay, well, it's a lesson right there. Goodness. Any other topics? I'm off to a parent-teacher conference. It's kind of the season. And if I were to scroll up, Eva, would I find a bunch of
I-810
PowerPC
brings
news?
back memories to old Intel chipset.
it absolutely does, and it's E810,
E810.
like Ethernet.
Yes, $168 on eBay for what it's worth.
I mean, it's like honestly, it's probably better to buy Chelseo because Chelseo is like committed to FreeBSD, and
They've been
Intel is
awesome.
like, yeah, like it's probably better to buy Chelseo, because driver support makes all the difference, and
Yep.
like the Intel team is like, they're like, oh my God, we want to do this. Maybe we could do it on the weekend, but
As you've
it's
learned.
also I heard from the foundation that they're moving their graphics drivers kind of in a direction that seems like they're going to be more GPL. And so Intel's a sketchy
Oh,
bet in general.
oh dear.
Um, but like I said, it's the cheapest 100 gigabit networking. I mean, everybody can afford that.
Yeah. Well, the Chelsea ones
That's like
aren't
cheaper than
unreasonable, and Chelsea's been great. They have more diagnostic information, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean,
Well,
y'all saw the one, uh, the 10 gig NIC in my machines Intel because they're cheap.
yeah, if
They're
someone
cheap and
needs an
available.
X520s, I've got a bunch of them that are getting replaced by Chelsea cards. Single and dual
so
port.
I put
Hmm.
in networking 7, I changed it from the EM driver as the Ethernet example to the 10 gig driver because I feel like it's like, okay, if you're building a dedicated file server at your house or your company or whatever, like 10 gig is the minimum. Like you're building
You're
a
not.
small server. So I wanted to show that. I also have a friend who administers a data center in Maine for the state government of Maine, and he said that today um, our 10 gig is out of the box faster than Linux. Like Linux can be tuned faster,
Hmm.
but just like out of the box performance on whatever OS he was using, he said it was better.
To put it in perspective, my wireless access point goes higher than 1 gig at this point.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's what I needed to hear because I was like, man, should I change this? And people sometimes object to churn where there's no functional change, but it is kind of a functional change because we're showing people up to date stuff. Even up to date ish.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I hope this question's okay. Now I'm curious, what 10 gigabit managed switches do people like if I'm going to replace a handful of 1 gigabit managed switches I have?
How many ports?
Look up the MikroTik
Exactly.
matrix, download the CVS file, import it in a spreadsheet, and filter by features. You probably want something with router as support and the sufficient number of ports.
I've been using the 4s and 8s to that point.
Cool.
And yeah,
My little switch
it's
is a microtic switch.
if for home networking, it's great because you can also squeeze a bunch of additional control plane stuff in there, like I don't know, DHCP server, DNS cache within reason, of course, or just out of band VPN access via WireGuard, or if it's an ARM chip via zero tier.
I guess I want real simple. I just want VLANs. I've got some TP links that are working great, and all they do is VLANs for me. The DNS
They
elsewhere, but they're limited to 1 gigabit.
So they have a web interface, even with routers, where you can just point and click in a web interface.
Yeah, and you hate their web
But
interface or web figure.
no, I don't hate.
Okay.
It's just I prefer the SSH connection.
Amen. And type export at the SSH connection. It boom gives a config. You can re-upload.
Yeah,
Sure.
I'm
And
slightly
so,
biased as a
okay,
Latvian American, but yes, the
and you
MikroTik is
can
quite cool.
use SwitchOS if you want a dump down interface.
okay. So I want to clarify. I want a managed switch that does VLANs 10 gigabit, and y'all are telling me MikroTik is the one to look at, right?
They have So that depends. If you want to go up and prepare yourself for a bigger environment, maybe you're better off, especially in the continental United States, to look up Craigslist if you're in a bigger town, and or eBay, and pick up used networking gear. It will be a lot more power hungry, but you can practice for your certs or whatever with it. And it's probably around the same price point as new MikroTik gear.
There are some
Warranty and
affordable Dell, etc. switches, and Cisco, but wow, the noise might get ya.
yeah,
MikroTik is
you will
generally
That's
have
fair.
your
fanless.
10K RPM, 40 millimeters
Yeah.
air raid sirens
So
built
yeah,
in,
this
which
this
consume
this is
like
for
10 to 20% of the power budget of the device because of the inefficient form factor for the fan. And they will run ancient chipsets, which will eat a lot of power idling.
yeah. So this is for my home network. It's to replace a TP-Link switch.
Mhm.
I basically want my TP-Link. I want something similar to my TP-Link switch, but 10 gigabits.
Mhm.
I'd look at one of Macrotic's offering, Microtech, whatever their name is,
Yep.
the
Cool.
Latvian company.
Thank you.
How do I
Yeah.
pronounce it, Michael?
Well, so it's MikroTik as a company, which is Mikrotiko, small network. That's Latvian. They're fine with MikroTik, but if you watch various videos that have, say, AI synthetic voices, a recent one did Mikrotic, and I was like, what are they talking? And I couldn't even recognize it. Like, what the hell is a Mikrotic? Oh, it's MikroTik. Yeah, okay. Lobby. However, I may have a
So
terrible t-shirt idea to end this on. Go ahead, you
I may
share
have
your
trained
last
that
words.
AI.
You were trained by AI?
No, I may have been. They may have trained the AI on me. That
Okay.
may have been where the training set came from.
joking aside, do you want copper ports or SFP plus ports for your home network?
I don't know. I don't really understand the question. I want whatever's
Um,
closest to a
Well,
TP-Link.
okay, so the traditional way to wire up 1 gig Ethernet in a residential setting is via copper cabling, just RG45. Once you go to 10 gig and beyond, it makes sense to use so-called direct access cables if you want to reduce power and cost for things like, oh, the switch on top of my home server, instead of burning 3 watts on either end on the transceiver to
And
make
I'm
it
using DAC
last.
cables
Yeah,
for
that's what
my
I'm doing, DAC
connections where
cables or
possible.
just. And then these days, if you go to fs.com and look, 10 gig capable both single mode and multi mode transceivers are so cheap, and short fiber patch cables. The doesn't break immediately fiber is good enough unless you intend to roll your chair over it every day.
Don't do that.
Exactly. So yeah,
Fiber is getting amazingly cheap.
Fiber is
Yeah.
really
You can get
often cheaper than copper one past 10 gig.
At this
Because
point,
Yeah, this is
on my
very helpful, and I think it's a good starting point for me to do some research.
but for super
I
short
would
distances, I would go with back cables, assuming you don't have to go through like a patch panel or through a wall or anything like that.
yeah, if it's in a cluster in one corner of your room, go with DAC cables and be happy you're saving power, which means because one of the big problems with having 12 or 24 10 gig copper ports on your switch is that just the cooling for all the transceivers kind of requires you to have active cooling of the noisy variety in the
And to
switch.
and to be clear, I mentioned I'm doing that at home, here in the data center as well. I've got a rack of stuff that's all 10 gig, and that's all DAC cables because they're cheaper,
Of course. And they're
especially
long
long
enough
term.
to reach from the middle of the rack up and down.
Easily, yep.
You don't have to even spend the whole height of the rack if you put the switches in the middle.
And
And
we put the
then
switches in the middle, so
exactly, don't be stupid. It's a valid strategy.
anywho, I need to go get food. I haven't had anything to eat all day. So I will see you all later.
So,
later.
by the way, here
Yeah.
before you leave, this is the link to the metrics. There you can download the CSV and filter by features if you want to. Yeah.
Also, we're Wi-Fi AC has hit current, so the IWX driver, the IWL Wi-Fi driver, and the RTWN driver are supporting Wi-Fi AC. Fastest Wi-Fi I've had so far.
Oh,
It's
nice. I have
very
to
nice.
test that. I should have into what is it, 200 or 201 in my gaming desktop. So I could just boot the FreeBSD system on it and check how fast it runs with my AC access points.
It's working pretty well
Yeah,
on my
sorry.
211.
Yeah. I'm just
And then
curious
I
because FreeBSD used to support them, but maxed out at 11N rates. And I never could be bothered with Wi-Fi box when I had a 10 gig port at the back of a machine.
it seems to
Already,
be just working now.
it's nice because
I see my mute finally worked when I didn't want it to work. Okay, well, we've lost our volunteer for the close. And thank you, everyone. I wish you a fantastic week and weekend and invite you to like and subscribe. And I will leave the call open after the call, after the recording. Take care.